Well, Julie, what you think? This is Larry.
I think we should start. Well, hello, everybody. We're delighted that you would join us. My name is Julie Avery, and I'm your host today. Larry Dickerson from Missouri will be our presenter. And this is the second in a series that a North Central Regional Center for Rural Development seed grant assisted us in developing. Um, Please note on the screen the series of topics and dates. The first link is where you can register if you haven't registered. And the second link is where recordings are posted. All of our sessions are going to be recorded. And the simple way to get to that is to Google NCRCRD, Michigan State University. That will get you to the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development site, and one of the tabs at the top is webinars, and the Heritage Tourism Initiative has its own set of pages there. So after each webinar, we will post the recording of the webinar, and also PowerPoints that are used in these series will be there for you to download if you like to do that ahead of time to take notes. Today's session is going to focus on if your community, is heritage tourism a fit for your community? And this is one of the general areas that our web materials will address. I want to introduce my co-team leader in this project, Larry Dickerson. Larry is from the University of Missouri Extension at Columbia, and he's worked in community and economic and organizational development for close to 40 years. Larry's work focuses on tourism and heritage tourism, mainly in Alaska and Missouri, and he's also served in many roles: executive director, project manager, academic faculty, and community organizer. Larry has a bachelor's in political science and a master's of science in community development. He's also the author of Creating Healthy Communities, The Process of Community Discovery, and a co-author of Creating a Healthy Community, which is soon to be published by the University of Alaska Fairbanks Cooperative Extension. Larry, can I turn this over to you?
Yeah, and thank you, Julie, and welcome everyone. It's nice that you take some time out to your busy day to join us on this second webinar on Is Heritage Tourism a Fit for Your Community? And thanks for that nice introduction, Julie. One of the things I guess I've learned over the years in working in community economic development is that communities, as they undergo any kind of developmental process or they look at strategies for improving their community, that they take a good look at, is this really a good strategy? Is this really a fit for our community? And that's really kind of what I want to focus on today, and talk a little bit about some of the tools that have evolved through my doing this with communities over the years. And I just want to say up front, there's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm going to share with you the ones that have evolved from my work in communities in many places, both Alaska, Missouri, and many other countries I've had the good fortune to work in. So having said that, I think there's some basic considerations that you want to think about as your community is thinking about maybe embarking on any economic development strategy, but particularly heritage tourism. Can tourism deliver economic, social, environmental benefits? Sure it can, but it can also not be implemented without costs, and you must look at all of the costs, and hopefully some of this today will help you do that. You got to look at, do you have the capacities and resources to actually implement and make heritage tourism a benefit for your community? And as you'll see in a second, you really have to have benefits that are much more than economic, and I'll share with you some tools that I've used to help communities do that. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box, and I will get to them just as soon as is practicable. Going on to the next slide, one of the things we've tried to do with these series of webinars and with the website that'll be up, and hopefully things that you will share, is really make this sort of process oriented in terms of how can communities do this themselves. I mean, as we said in the first one, our intent is really to help communities to engage in heritage tourism by themselves. the first question to me is, what kind of community do you want to be? And that's real critical. And I'll share a methodology I use with communities or an approach to help do that. And once you have a pretty good idea, what are your economic opportunities? You have to go through some kind of analytical or planning process to take a look at that. Um, and if tourism is one of those viable opportunities, what kind of tourism would fit you best? As we know, there's lots of tourism going on right now. And yes, Kathy, the presentation will be available for download in the chat box. And if heritage tourism, how ready are you to implement it? So really what I'm going to talk about today is going to be geared around these four questions. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And something that I've used over the years, and this has really evolved over the last 25 years through my work, is a healthy community approach. Not just health of individuals, but how do you tell if your community is healthy or not? And that's kind of the approach I use. And it's really an holistic approach to community development, and incorporates some basic community development concepts and principles. I don't really have time to go into all of those, but I can certainly respond and give you some of those if you want more information. One of the things that I think's real important is Julie said in the title of the first book, is a community discovery approach. How do you take a new look at yourself, an appreciative look, looking from a more asset-based approach other than what's wrong with your community? Managing community change is another integral part of this, especially if you're going to introduce something that may change your community fairly dramatically. One of the quotes I like to use is Albert Einstein said, "The only constant in the universe is change," but one of my native Missourians, Mark Twain, said, "The only person that likes change is a baby with a messy diaper." And I found that to be true. So having the capacities to manage change and see how you can do that's important. Capacity development, leadership development. One of the things integral to the healthy community approach is that it's really local ownership and control of the process throughout. I think another key is local knowledge. Who knows their community best but the people that live there? So they really should be driving a process that's going to be developmental and change and may affect some change for the community. The second part of the healthy community, what kind of community you want to be, is I work with communities to actually design and implement a process that they can do on their own. It's not really a canned process. And I'll talk a little bit about a process design process I use to do that. Focus on the healthy is defined by the community. I would go out to rural Alaska quite a bit, and I've done a lot of radio work over the years, and they always want somebody new on the radio, and they say, "Well, what do you think makes us healthy?" And I would respond by saying, "That's really not my call. It's up to the community." So part of the processes that I use with communities is they define what really makes them healthy. It's proactive and preventative. Hopefully it's inclusive and participatory. And one of the things that I've worked with communities over in this healthy community holistic approach is sort of at the end of this, we developed some measures and indicators of community health, both quantitative and qualitative, that help guide them into the future. And in the villages, the elders or the city council would say, "Hey, if we do this, what's it going to do to our measures of our indicators of community health?" I did it with a community in Missouri not too many years ago, a visioning. And when I went back a year later to look at how they wanted to vision, they didn't even want to take a look at the vision. They wanted to look at how they were doing on their measures or indicators of community health, which I found pretty interesting. The other part of this is a tool I'm going to show you next, is something that's really evolved over the years, is a web of community. Some of you may be familiar with Chief Seattle's quote that says, "All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of man. Man does not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself." And I actually use a big ball of twine and actually get people in a circle, and we create the web of community. I ask them, "What makes your community healthy?" And we sort of create a web, and I have them pull back and tweak the web and see that everything's connected, and if one piece goes away. So hopefully get the idea. And I'm not going to go through all this today. This has really evolved from the communities I've worked with, the classes I've taught, just people that have looked at it. There's parts, interactions, resources, energy, those intangibles of a community. And it's a way for community to see the whole. But what I will say is that The web is never the same in any community I work with. They all sort of define it differently. It actually even looks different when you do the ball of twine. You see the different interconnections. But to me, it's just been a tool to see that whole of the community and how things fit together and how one thing affects everything else. And this is a way to me that however you do it, a visioning process, there's lots of good stuff out there. A lot of my colleagues do it differently. So I don't mean this to be the way you have to do it, but this is one way that I've evolved over the years that helps see the whole of a community and get a good sense of what do you want to be, and just as importantly, what not you want to be. I use sort of a favorites exercise, favorite things to do, places to go, reasons you live in your community, what's the heart and soul of your community that you not want to change. So through this process, you get a pretty good idea where you want to be and where you not want to be with a community. But so once you've done a look at what kind of community you want to be or not want to be, then really you want to take a look at, you know, what I call an economic opportunities process. It can be any kind of economic development planning and analysis process that helps you look at some things. And as you'll see, I don't know how this evolved over the years, but it's sort of the ease of economic development. I think it just sort of happens serendipitously. But the energy, as we look back at the web, one of the real core of a community and is the energy of a community, and the economy is key to that. And you got to have energy that fits your community. I always say if you want to be a couch potato energy, you need couch potato energy. If you want to be a marathon runner, you need marathon runner energy. And I've seen communities over the years that have embarked on these economic development processes have really ruined the heart and soul of their community. So that's why it's important to have that healthy community definition. Then you want to look at your economic base. What are your sources of employment and income, and what are ways that then you can strengthen the base of your economy. Also part of the economic opportunities process is I actually do a economic opportunities process with communities where we look at what do you have that's value in your economy, what resources do you have, what do you import, what do you export, and then we look at how could you add value, how could you enhance your resources, how could you substitute what you import, and how could you increase your export development. And this leads, and then I also like to look at with communities is the whole idea of entrepreneurship. We all know about individual entrepreneurship, which is small business development and entrepreneurs. I'm sure many of you have embarked on those kind of programs. But one of the things I like to look at with communities is their community entrepreneurship. Are they willing to invest in the infrastructure, the financing, the projects that would actually implement whatever economic development strategy they have, or tourism? And one that I think is real important is a social entrepreneurship. When I worked in the villages in Alaska, they all said, we don't really have any entrepreneurial skills. And I say, well, don't you do moose camp? Don't you do fish camp? Don't you organize your whaling adventures? And everybody say, oh yeah. So, I think a lot of communities have a lot more entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial skills than they look at. So that, to me, is part of that process. And out of this process, then, will come some strategies for economic development, some projects, and most importantly, small business opportunities. I don't have time today to share that with you, but if you're interested, I can share some more with you of how I actually work with communities on that process, and I'll talk a little bit about this more at the end of these three areas I'm going to talk about. And then to me, equally important is the equity in that you do in your economic development planning and analysis. I mean, locals should always be the beneficiaries of any economic development strategy, and I'm sure many of you have seen where economic development has occurred in communities where the locals were really not the beneficiaries. Those first opportunities should go to the locals, and the local businesses and projects and jobs should be funded locally and implemented locally first, and those opportunities should go to them. So you've got to have some kind of economic development planning analysis process. And so if you've done the first, where you've looked at what kind of community you want to be, and then you've looked at what are your opportunities, and if tourism wants to be one, there's a variety of things that you need to look at in tourism. One is the community involvement. Are people willing to be involved in tourism development. Another is the community behind it. Is there consensus that this is a good strategy? Is there ownership of tourism? Is there sanction from the governance of a community? When I years and years ago, when I first worked at the Lake of the Ozarks, uh, you know, you'd see bumper stickers that weren't very kind to tourism, saying we don't really want tourists here. Yet that was one of the key tourism areas of Missouri. So that's changed over the years, but I've worked in communities where they said we don't really want tourism. Whittier in Alaska was looking at ways. If anybody's been to Whittier, they know that everybody lived in one big old government built building right after and during World War II. Well, they were getting land to where they could build individual homes, and they started talking about, tourism's wonderful for us, but we don't want it where we're going to live. So, there has to be that involvement. Some of these we're going to talk about in later webinars coming up. Like next week will be some of this feasibility analysis, the inventory. But I think one of the king's things I want to point out here, that whatever kind of economic development, tourism development you embark on, you should make sure it's going to be a positive return on investment. I watched communities just jump right in and not really have the wherewithal or the resources or capacities or product to make it really viable. So you need to consider that also. This is something that we'll talk about in 2 weeks, is how do you organize for tourism? But you've got to really, be organized, know who needs to be involved. Are there staff that can do it? Do you have the funding? Can you organize the funding to do that as part of your tourism development analysis and planning? Everybody knows today the big buzzwords are capacity building. Do you have or can you easily build the capacity for tourism? That we'll talk in a later webinar on tourism implementation. How do you market it? How do you stretch the season? How do you do special events? That will be coming up in one of our future webinars. Also, evaluation will be coming up in one of our future webinars. But, to me, some things to think about as you're seeing as it's a fit for your community is, well, does heritage tourism fit with our community definition? Is it really viable? Will it enhance or detract for community health? Will it, dilute or help, achieve our measures of community health? Once again, will it produce a local positive return on investment? And will the locals really be the beneficiaries of what happens? So what you've got, before we go into assessment, I'm going to put this up, but I'll talk in a second, is that I've outlined 3 sort of basic processes. One is a holistic community development process that helps you take a look at what kind of community you want to be or not be, your vision, your dreams. Secondly is some kind of economic development process that helps you analyze and look at the opportunities you have. And third is tourism comes up as one of those opportunities or viabilities that you see for your community, that you can then look at some tourism analysis and process things to see, hey, yeah, can we really do this? One of the things I'm going to say is, I've started in many, many places with communities. I started in one community in Missouri where they wanted to do a leaky bucket, which is another way of doing economic opportunities, where money flows in, it circulates, and it leaks out of the bucket, and you identify some of those as part of that economic opportunities process. But then they said, hey, we really want to take a look about, what kind of community we want to be. We want to see and make sure that we keep the heart and soul of our community. So that morphed into a healthy community. And then they said, well, we want to take more closer look at tourism. I started another community, one to strategic doing. We don't want visioning, we don't want planning, we want to see what we can do right away. And then they went back and said, well, maybe we should look at, what it is that, we really want our community to be. Does it fit? So, when I work with communities, I go in and work where they're at. And so we'll start in many different places. I will share some of these processes with them and say, what have you done? What have you not done? So I don't mean you have to do all this in a way, because process is never linear. A lot of these things are going on at the same time. So, I usually work with communities to try not to do to or for them, to help them figure out where it is that they're at, where they want to go, and how do they get from here to there. And also, part of that planning process is, what do you want to save, and what are the key capacities, resources you have to do that. So, Sorry to go through this quickly, but we just want to give you some basic overviews. So now you say, hey, we think going through these processes, or we've done them already, and we have a pretty good sense of these things. You know, what is it? I'm sorry. I'm going to go back. What is it that we need to think about in terms of actually doing heritage tourism? There's some other considerations to think about. The pressure on local resources. Will it conflict with local values and cultures? A lot of folks don't want to share their culture. The startup operational maintenance costs. Do you have those? You have to look at the whole life cycle of what it's going to take to implement heritage tourism. Sometimes it'll put a big stress on local capacities. The Lake of the Ozark, when I worked there, became the third largest city in the state of Missouri on weekends in the summer, and yet they had a permanent population of 3 or 4,000. How was it that they could build the capacities needed to handle hundreds of thousands of people on weekends? And I'll talk a little about that in taxing, but you really can really stress your capacities if you grow too quickly. There's economic factors and real critical who will benefit and who's going to pay the costs of implementing heritage tourism. Who's going to take the lead? Somebody's got to take the lead, and here's a whole variety of groups to do that. But basically you've got to have some leadership to make sure that it's going to happen. Then you've got to have some kind of planning. Here's once again a whole variety of different kinds of plans and our regional plans a community can have, but do you have a plan to guide you into the future? That's what I was talking about earlier on holistic community development. A lot of ways to do that. So do you have a plan, or can you put a planning process in place? Local support, I've already mentioned that. Is there government support, financial institutions, local citizens? All of these are important, and you may think it's a fit, but in your readiness there may not really be support that may change that fit that you think you have. Your local economic climate, something you have to look at. And down here at the bottom is economic growth a local priority for folks or not? I worked with a community years ago about 30 miles outside the Lake of the Ozarks, and they said, we don't want to grow. We don't want to change. We like how it is. How do we insulate ourselves from what's going on around the rest of the lake area, which was a real interesting community to work in. So you've got to take a look at your economic climate. A tax base. I mentioned Lake Ozarks, and we had to figure out ways to build the tax base to support all the infrastructure that they needed to manage, several 100,000 people on a weekend and only 4,000 or 5,000 the rest of the time. So, you're going to have that support, and will you be able to build a tax base to build the infrastructure to support this that you need? Marketing. It used to be pretty simple, but now with all the social networking, websites, all of the things, and I know that Jonathan Day is going to talk some more about in the implementing strategy. Jonathan's done a whole bunch of marketing and is really good at the at the social marketing. But so you do have those capacities. It's a whole different world now in terms of how you market yourselves. And this is also key. Do you have the trained workforce? And also down here, do you have people that are willing to work, as in the visitor industry? When I, once again, at the Lake of the Ozarks, we had a lot of folks that didn't want to work for minimum wage and no benefits. They actually bussed in people from Fort Leonard Wood 100 miles away for a while because that's the only way they could get, the spouses of those in the military that were, desperate for work and would do anything. And they actually had a bus that went down every day. So another key part of, is it a fit? Do you have the workforce that's willing to do that? The environment is key. And appearances can change. You can get a lot of trash from a lot more people. One that was real critical in the villages in Alaska was the sacred places and activities. They really didn't want tourism going to their favorite berry patches or the places they went for solitude or the places they went for their sacred activities. So that was also a key, to saying, hey, how will this affect those sacred places and the environment in which we live? And I mentioned in the web, but not in any detail, about the social components of your community, the sense of community, the local culture and heritage. Are you going to be a welcoming committee or a welcoming community or not really one of them? Are there going to be interactions to the community's quality of life? all those intangibles in the web of community can be very direly affected by any kind of economic activity, and maybe tourism where people really want to see everything and they don't, and some of the locals don't really want to share that with you. And so finally, you know, you have to really take your time and see, is tourism really a fit for your community in terms of what the community wants to be? Is it really a viable economic strategy? Do you really have the wherewithal, to make tourism? Are you ready for it? Do you have the capacities for it? As hopefully I pointed out, there's a lot more than economic considerations, especially if you consider the web and all of those things that make a community home. And so what I've tried to share with you today a little bit, quickly I know, is a way to take a good look at your community and see if heritage tourism is a fit for your community. A discovery process that that I think is real important. You got to go through that discovery process, and really, say, hey, is do we really want tourism to fit? Does it fit? Is it really a viable economic strategy? Do we have the wherewithal to do it? And I think one of the things about going through a discovery process, the community looks at itself with much different eyes. I'll share one story, a community north of the Lake of the Ozarks where everybody from Kansas City would go on weekends and drive through their community. They saw that traffic as a something that was really a nuisance to the community. Well, we started working with them. Not only did we help them see that they could stop. That was really the only main stopping area between Kansas City and St. Louis, and they could draw from that. But they also had a spring in town that flooded and produced so much water they made it a park. Well, we just happened to get the spring tested, the water tested, and found out some of the best spring water in the world. And we had Perrier and the Hollow Waters and everybody coming in. So something that they saw as a prime nuisance could really be the economic salvation of the community. So I think looking at yourself in different ways is important, not just for heritage tourism, but looking at all the opportunities. And to me, when you embark on any kind of developmental or community process, you want to enhance that community health, and you want to help it. And one thing I'll say is, don't expect heritage tourism to be the 100% solution. It could be a 10 or 20% solution that could really add to what else you're doing in your community. So with that, I know I went through this quickly. I have a couple of resources that if you're interested, I don't get any money from these. We're not really selling the first one. One is the first Healthy Community book that I did alone in 2001. I can send you that to you free electronically if you want it. And then the second one that's coming out that really I think has a variety of authors. Some of you know Cornelia Flora or Edgar Boone and other folks from Missouri and Tony Nakazawa from Alaska. We really updated it and changed the approach and format a little bit. And I'm not sure how much that's going to be, but it will be forthcoming the next month or so. So a lot of what I've shared with you is out of there. But please feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to share some of the processes I used or give you other resources and ways to do this. As I said, this is just my way that I've evolved over the last 40 years or so are doing this. There's lots of other ways to do this, and a lot of good community developers out there doing it in many different ways. And what you need to do is figure out what's the best process for your community. The last thing I'm going to share is every community I work with, I use what I call a process design process, where I just ask them a series of questions, and out of that comes the ingredients for the process, and we build their process the way they want to do it in their community. So I don't really use canned processes, but I have, as I said, a variety of educational ways of looking at some of the ingredients. So, Julie, I guess I can look at the chat, and it said mentioned a community Ozarks and want tourism. Did they get tourists anyhow? If so, what role did I do to assist them? Actually, this community became infamous because what they did, they have, when you get into the community, you have to go up and down a great big hill each way. And so they set up speed traps. And what they did, they actually made 60 Minutes for their infamous speed trap, Liz. And that's how they funded a whole lot of things they wanted to do in their community. And they really made it so that they were not very friendly to visitors. And what we did is we really looked at how they could stay the same and not have tourism. To this day, though I don't work in that area anymore, they still don't have a whole lot of tourism. They just really like being the kind of community they are, and it's pretty amazing in this day and time with change how they've really um, managed to maintain that kind of community they want to be. That was actually in 1986. It was the first time I used a healthy community approach. So it's really interesting. Yeah, it was a great story on speed traps, but it was amazing how much funding that they generated out of that. Um, Julie, did any other comments or questions?
Well, I wanted to invite everybody. One of the products that's coming from our North Central grant is a website that will have a number of areas that these webinars are based on, and a lot of material to help communities and organizations and regions to begin to figure out how to work together to develop tourism around heritage issues. And we also wanted to invite everybody, we're looking for reviewers, peer reviewers, to take a look at all our part of our website. And if you are interested in doing that, and or if you would like to receive an email announcement when the website goes live, which we think will be this month, please leave your email in the chat box and note that you're interested in being a reviewer, or that you want the announcement, or just both if you'd like both of those. And are there any questions or comments for Larry?
Well, while they're
Some
typing,
people
I
are,
will say this is, yeah, as I said, this is just one way I'm sharing with you. This is something how I've used this over the years. There's lots of good stuff, and what we hope is that you will share how you've done it, and we can post on our website so people will have a whole variety of processes and materials to choose some. The name of
Gary,
the
would
book,
you
you can
read?
send an email to others. Yeah, it's called, the first one was called Creating Healthy Communities, the Process of Community Discovery. It's no longer in print. It was done in 2001, and I actually did that for working with the communities in Alaska. It was fairly Alaska specific, but still had a lot of basic community development concepts and principles inculcated in it. The new one is called Creating a Healthy Community, a Handbook. And we've got about 8 authors, I think, on this one. And we've hopefully updated, but as I'll mention, one of the authors called me the other day and says, "Hey, is there time I can redo what I've done? I've been learning over the last year, and it really was kind of late to do that." So all this evolves. We don't claim to have any answers. We're just trying to share lessons we've learned.
I've put up a slide that's a little soft survey, and we would very much appreciate it if you would comment on what you thought about the survey. And as it says, click anything that applies to you. And thanks for those of you who are giving your email. In terms of Kathy's comment about the second book, it's not been published yet, but if you want to leave your email and just put book, we'll get that information to Larry, and he can provide that to you when the book is published. We'll also probably announce it through the North Central region.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. It's going to be very minimal cost, and it may be free electronically. I just don't know yet. Well, we still have some time. Any other comments or questions?
I want you to all remember, too, that at the North Central website, there is a tab for webinars, and our Heritage Tourism Initiative has its own page there, and it will, that's where all of our recorded presentations will be posted within a day or two after they're recorded, and then the PowerPoints will be available a day or two before the presentation for those of you, like I am, who like to take notes on something that relates to the structure. So check it out, check out all of our topics, and for those of you who are interested in the website, a little preview. The webinars are based on the different modules that we're developing for the website. Larry, anything else?
No, if there's no other comments or questions, but I would just encourage you to submit your stories and materials and processes that you've used in your communities, because it seems like we have folks with a whole lot of expertise out here.
One of the efforts of our project is to try to start identifying those of us who are working across the country, especially in the north central region, who are working in tourism, because we come out of a lot of different places. And if we can help to strengthen a network where we could share our resources and our expertise and materials and processes, that would just benefit all of us. So that's part of our goal for the Heritage Tourism website, to be a portal and a Kickstarter for something that might grow out of that. And kind of along those lines, we want to announce to people that Michigan is going to be delighted to host the next National Tourism Conference. That's going to be held in Detroit in August of 2013. So put that on your calendar, and I'm sure that we'll be getting information out to you about that.
Yep. Please, any other comments or questions? I know I went through this pretty quickly, but the intent is these just to give you some sense of how to proceed, and I'm sure there's lots of other ways. So we hope to hear from you on those.
During our first webinar, we had a special interest emerge in tourism within Native American communities. And there is a concern that people are trying to do tourism to Native American communities, but all of the folks on our Heritage Tourism team are very adamant, as Larry spoke earlier, about not doing to or doing for people, but to helping people and communities look at what they have and make thoughtful decisions about themselves. So if any one of you has a special interest or knows of a good or even a bad example of tourism development with or growing from Native American communities, we would be real interested in knowing about that. And thanks for filling out the survey form.
Well, we tried to design these so that we have, 20 to 30 minutes for comments or questions. Is there anything anybody wants to share with us? I know it's harder in the chat to do so, but, we have another 20 minutes or so if there's things you want to ask or things you want to share. And I see Kathy is typing.
Yes, Kathy, I think that almost everybody feels that the National Trust procedures and approaches and guidelines are among the top, and we reference the National Trust Heritage Tourism programs in our materials and make reference to that. One of our participants, Eric from Nebraska, who's focused in tourism, has helped a Nebraska study that has been published, a Nebraska plan for tourism, and Eric was a partner with a woman from the National Trust Heritage Tourism Office or programs in doing that. It's an excellent publication if you all are looking for something like that. Google around for that and you will find it interesting.
Liz asks, I've got another example from Lake of the Ozarks, another community that was right on the lake itself, Liz, and actually, anybody's familiar, this has been long enough, it's Lake Ozark, which is a community right next to Bagnell Dam. And the business owners, of course, really wanted to have tourism, but at that time there was still a small community of folks that had lived there forever, ever since the dam was built mostly, and they didn't want tourism because it was going to change how Lake Ozark went forward. And that was really interesting. We went in and we did sessions on, with the community, what are the commonalities, what do you want, what do you not want on tourism, how do you want to do it, and it became pretty clear very quickly, and I don't mean this badly, that those that lived there were probably going to not be around a long time because they were mostly elderly. But we tried to do tourism in a way that was consistent, that would protect where they lived and how the community moved forward. And so we worked with the Lake Ozark Betterment Association. We worked with Union Electric at the time, and tried to really design tourism such that those that were still residents in Lake Ozark were impacted as little as possible. And we worked with the Department of Transportation, which allowed the right-of-way highway to be taken over so you could do more walking tourism, because that was one of the big things, was the traffic at the lake. We worked with folks across the other side of the dam that wanted to put in some golf course and other residential areas to help support the infrastructure needed, which was a big one, putting in a wastewater system that would handle what they needed without charging the residents too much money. And it took some time, and actually the real change was when the business owners moved into Lake Ozark themselves and actually got elected to the city council, and that's when things really moved forward, when they became the city council folks. But it was a 5 to 7 year process that all happened, and it was very interesting. The old Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." And we brought several resources from the university down, not just myself, to look at feasibility on the. If anybody's been to Lake of the Ozarks, a lot of those golf courses came out of that's on the north side of the lake. The feasibility studies, the financing, worked with the state Department of Administration on how the financing for the wastewater system be done. We worked with the Department of Transportation on the road bypass, and just all kinds of things. It was really a real partnership between Extension and the communities and state agencies. And it was tough because a lot of folks just didn't want it. They were used to their lifestyle, but that was one of those instances where that really was the key area of the lake where people could actually walk and enjoy the lake. We actually looked at, because all the businesses were on the storefront, and we looked and had students come down from a class look at how they could build the back of the buildings and actually make parks and walking areas and some lakefront walking, which was difficult because the Union Electric's right away. So there was all kinds of factors that went into that. The end result is Lake Ozark's prospering pretty good as a tourism area, and there's still people that live there as residents. So I don't know if that gives you a a good example or not. Let's see, I'll read that. Nope, I've never written up this case study. Getting a couple of books written. I don't like to write. I've just been forced to over the years, Liz. But no, I haven't. But it was really interesting. But I could take that really to the whole of the Lake of the Ozarks area. Another part of this was the chambers of commerce never worked together around the lake. There was 8 chambers of commerce. And so we did, this is in the 1990s, did a Lake 2000 series where we looked at big issues around the lake. And I had, with the university's help, did an economic analysis, and everybody was saying tourism, tourism, tourism. But what we discovered through the economic analysis of the 3 counties around the lake and the districts, that 45% of the income was from dividends, interest, and rent, was retirement income. So we got one of our campus folks came down and did both longitudinal studies at Lake of the Ozarks and the Branson area about why retirees come, why they stay, why they leave. And we worked real hard on how do we make tourism and the in-migration of elderly compatible. And that was also another real interesting process to go through with the Lake Association and all the chambers together. And that's how the bridge across the lake from the east to the west side got built. They said we really need to connect ourselves together. So anyway, there's a lot of interesting things about tourism. And to me, the first was Lake Ozark divided, but the second was the compatibility, because really the year-round economy was being fueled by the in-migration of elderly, by retirees. And so working all that was I learned 10,000 times more than I ever knew. And I'll see. Right now I'm in the process of getting a Healthy Community book edited and out the door. But Maybe I can one of these days. So thank you. Let me know. Does this help? I mean, yeah, I really have never written
I
those
think,
up. I
Larry,
tell those stories in presentations. I'm sorry, Julie, go ahead.
you have a challenge. Larry, you have a challenge from Liz here. We'll have to push on you to do some case studies.
Yep. Most everybody else is already retired or gone, though, that I'd work with on that. So, I'd want to
So
have
you're
more
the
than just
wise
my
old man.
perceptions. Yeah, thanks, Julie.
Well, I will say that I think we've come to the end of our discussion. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and thank you especially, Larry, for your contributions. Remember, if you if you want to review what we have done in this presentation or you want to share it with other people, you can go to the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development and click on the webinar pages and see where we are. And so, Larry, do you have any final words?
No, thank you. And once again, you can see dickersonl@missouri.edu. Please email me directly, and I can send you the original book. I can send you free, and I can then let you know when the other one comes available. Or if you have questions or comments, you got things you want to share with me that would be good tools. As Julie knows, I'm a learner, and I don't claim that this is an end all at all. It's just one way I've learned. I like to see what other folks are doing and learn and use it.
And I need to apologize for my language. Larry is a sage. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.